Hi, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome to our fourth session of In Poverty, the Lunch and Learn series hosted by United Way's Young Leaders. We're so glad you could be with us today. My name is Samantha Ashby, and I serve as chair of United Way's Young Leaders. We're a group of young professionals in Greensboro learning together and working to create community-wide change. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, and our speakers will get to them at the end of the presentations. Also, this session will be recorded, and you will receive via email the recording link, as well as a copy of today's presentation. Before I introduce today's first speaker, I would like to offer a big thanks to our Young Leaders Cabinet for planning this engaging and informative series. Our first speaker today is Dr. Jamie King. He is the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching, Learning, and Professional Development for Guilford County Schools. He is a graduate of Appalachian State University, holds a master's degree from UNCG, and also a doctoral degree in educational leadership from High Point University. He has served as principal at Northeast Middle, principal at Greensboro College Middle College, and assistant principal at Northeast High. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jamie King. Jamie, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. So I'm going to kind of jump right in here to try to save much time at the end for questions. I'll also say that I am not great at speaking straight from a PowerPoint, so I apologize if I get off topic and go down a rabbit hole that I'm very known to do. So, but just to give you some context of Guilford County Schools, because I know we all come from different backgrounds on here, and some of you may have students, some of you may not have been in school since you went to school. So just to help give you some kind of context of where Guilford County Schools is at. We are the 47th largest school district in the nation. We have about 10,000 full and part-time employees. Our enrollment for the current school year is right at 69,355 students. That's down from last year. Our district enrollment was almost 74,000 students. But with COVID and with kind of not knowing where students are and the flexibility of students, our enrollment is down this year, which is pretty prevalent across the country. With enrollment being down, our biggest drop this year is in kindergarten. And as many of you know, students came back to school today. A lot of our students did. So we're hoping to kind of start to see that enrollment increase a little bit as we continue to move through this process. When you think about Guilford County Schools, a lot of people don't know about like budget and how big we really are. So our total operating budget is about $780 million. You know, most of that is spent on salaries. Some of that is of course spent on instructional supplies, building maintenance, you know, construction costs, all of those things. So when you really break that down, when you think about, we have 126 different school buildings and school sites. You know, you start breaking that down and it becomes very little that's actually left out there to spend that's not spent on stuff that's already budgeted for. There's the breakdown of kind of our schools. This year we did open 2 virtual schools. So we have a middle school virtual school that's for 6-8 students. And then we have a K-5 virtual school. Our K-5 virtual school is actually our biggest school in the district. We have well over 2,000 students that are currently enrolled in the virtual school. And alternative schools are schools that have various settings. So we have alternative schools that are some of our public separate schools for our students with severe disabilities. We have alternative schools for some discipline infraction students. And then we also have alternative learning environments like home hospital bound for some of our students who can't physically come into the school. Overall, of Guilford County Schools, about 66.3% of our students receive free or reduced lunch services. So that's really important when you put that in context of United Way and ending poverty and what we talk about. So that means, you know, over half of our students, over half of one over every 2 students live in poverty and come from a home in poverty. And so that's really important when we think about the context of Guilford County Schools, because many people who have lived here for a long time don't realize that the high number of students that are in poverty in our district. Guilford County School really builds from the original county school district, the Greensboro City School District, and then the High Point City School District. And those three school districts merged in the 80s to what we have now as the Guilford County Schools. And then I always think it's important just to kind of talk about and put out there how many languages are spoken by our students. And these are their first languages. So we have a whole lot more than 115 languages, but we have 115 languages that are spoken by our students as their first primary language. And so that's, again, really important when you talk about the diversity of students across our district. And when you talk about those 69,000 students, that's a lot of different languages that we assist with. We have, face-to-face, in person, we have about 20 different languages that we have interpreters for. And for any other language, we contract out with services who can provide interpreting services for those other languages. We also, and it's not really well known, but we also have a large amount of sign language and deaf and hard of hearing students and population in Guilford County. Those of you, again, who have lived in Guilford County for a while know that we used to have the School for the Deaf that was out in Brown Summit, out in the northern part of Guilford County. And so a lot of those families still live here, and all of those students go to school together, so they can pick to go to Kaiser as their middle school and then Grimsley as their high school, so that they're all together. We have quite a large number of that population in our district as well. You can go to the next slide. So that kind of gives you a background context for Guilford County Schools, where we're at. I think, that 47th largest school district in the nation is something that's pretty remarkable. Most people don't think that, again, who live here. People don't always think of Greensboro as being this big city or big metropolis. But when you really put it in context of the 47th largest school district, that's a pretty good sized school. So to kind of get now on topic of COVID-19 and some of the challenges that we face due to COVID-19, we have this year 3 different options that students can learn from. And so that's very different, right? Traditionally in a school setting, you have one way to go to school, and that's to go face to face, right? You get on the bus, your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, neighbor, someone takes you to school, and you go into a regular school building, just like many of us probably went to. This year with COVID-19, one of the challenges is that we now have 3 different learning opportunities for students to kind of partake in. So one is the traditional face-to-face classroom, very similar to what would be a typical school experience. We kind of call it our brick and mortar buildings. A new option this year, and a new option actually very recently as well, is remote classrooms. So students who are interested in not coming to the building, but want to keep their teacher and want to stay enrolled in that school, can have what we call remote learning at their home school. And so teachers at that home school teach the class. The students are still enrolled in that traditional neighborhood school. They just don't attend class at the school. They attend class remotely at their home. And so that's, again, a new thing that we've had this year. And then as I talked about earlier, we opened up 2 virtual schools this year. And those schools are designed to be 100% virtual. The students are enrolled in that school itself. That school has what we call a school number. So it's its own separate school entity. It has its own school principal, own school counselors. The learning there is set up to be 100% remote. We try to build in social opportunities for kids that are remote. Students can also, in the virtual school, can learn at their own pace. And so that's a very different type of learning system where students can kind of progress or have a little more time depending on their own needs. So again, that's new. Technology purchases is a huge challenge. Prior, our middle schools were one-to-one. We received a grant about 10 years ago, and it created a one-to-one environment for all of our middle schools, but our elementary and high schools were not one-to-one. So since March, we've really tried to put together a package to move to one-to-one. We have purchased enough devices for all of our students and schools to be one-to-one. Will be Apple environments in our pre-K through 3rd grade classrooms. All those students will have an iPad and the teachers will have MacBooks. And the purpose there is that, pre-K through 3rd grade students don't know how to read yet. And so you don't really want to give them a laptop. You want to give them a device that's really app driven so they can see different colors and click on it, learn letters and shapes. One-to-one is where each student has one device. So it's one device to one student. And then each teacher will also have a device. One of the challenges with that one was finding the funding for that, because that's not something that was built into our budget originally. So trying the funds to move to one-to-one. But then also there's every school district across the nation and really across the world right now is trying to buy technology. So there's a huge shipping delay. So for Guilford County Schools, we're just now receiving devices that we ordered in June. It's now November. And when we stopped, last year when all of this started in March, we had about 17,000 devices. If you go, the slide we just talked about, we have almost 70,000 students. There's not enough for everyone. We also never had MiFi or Wi-Fi access point. So those were things that we had to purchase to try to ensure that all of our students have access and have a device to actually, start their learning on. So that's definitely a challenge that we faced. Canvas is our learning management system. So if you've heard of Blackboard or any type of system that's kind of a one-stop shop where teachers can post both lessons, assignments, students can log on and access all of their work. It's called a learning management system, or an LMS. In education, we like to put acronyms on everything. So our learning management system is called Canvas. Since August, we've had about 98.7% of all of our students log on and access Canvas, which you would think is great. But there's also no way of really, one of the challenges that we face is there's no way of knowing what their engagement is. And so considering logging on is just considering that. It's just 98.7% of our students have logged on and accessed Canvas, but it's really hard to track the data on what they've done after they logged in. So that's really a challenge for us in this kind of remote learning environment with COVID-19, is trying to keep up with that. And then of course, our exceptional children or students with disabilities, providing their appropriate EC services. And this is also the same for our young students. It's hard, and I say this also as a parent. So I have a first grader and a second, and a fourth grader at home. And it is very difficult to teach younger kids how to read or how to write remotely. They need to see your face. They need to see how you enunciate. As a teacher, you need to stand over them and show them how to hold a pencil, how to write. Those things are really difficult to do remotely, as well as some of our EC services. Think about, the number of students who may get speech services, trying to provide therapy and speech therapy on a computer, just like what we're doing here. That's very difficult to do. And so, that's a huge challenge when we talk about kind of moving forward with students and what we faced with COVID-19. We can go to the next slide. And just real quick as we're moving there, I see some of the comments in the chat. I'll try to go back after I'm done and answer some of those questions and follow up. So feel free to just post any comments or questions there and I'll go back and answer them. So this is a dashboard that we have with Guilford County Schools. This is run by Public Health. There's a link to it on our Guilford County Schools website, and this really talks through the numbers. And I think this is definitely a challenge when we look at bringing students into the building and what we're currently, working with students. If, I'm one of those people who I kind of look at this religiously. Every day this gets updated around noon or 1 o'clock. And I'm pretty frequently kind of hitting, refresh on my computer screen to try to look at what numbers look like, because it's also, putting this in context of trying to educate 70,000 students when we have this pandemic going on, can be really difficult at times. So it kind of speaks for itself. I just wanted to kind of throw it in here as a slide to make sure, that all of you know about it. There's also the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services keeps a dashboard. And we try to kind of look at that frequently. So I'm not going to go through these numbers, but just kind of wanted to share it with you. You can go to the next slide. So some of the issues that we face when we talk about this that really relate to students of color, our Black and our brown students. When we talk about Guilford County Schools, that's the highest percentage of our students as well. We talked about that we're almost 70% free reduced lunch. So one of the major issues that we run into is access. And so being remote is difficult if you don't have a computer, if you don't have internet access. It's now middle of November and we have students who are still doing their work on a cell phone. And that's not okay, and that's not adequate. And we have to help fix that, both as a community and as Guilford County Schools. And so this is one of the things that we discovered. Our percentage of households without enough devices. If you think about, if you're supposed to be doing all your work on a computer, but you only have one computer and you have 2 or 3 children, that makes it really difficult. It also makes it really difficult if a parent who's working, is online working at home, and trying to use that device as well. And so again, this is one of the purposes in Guilford County Schools going to this one-to-one environment where every student will be issued a device, every staff member will be issued a device, is to try to eliminate that as a barrier, and to try to ensure that every single student has a device. I was a principal of a middle school and helped lead one-to-one, multiple one-to-one schools. And so it really does change how we teach and how kids learn when we talk about devices and access to devices. If you think about it, kids no longer carry multiple textbooks with them. Everything's accessible on the computer or on the iPad. One of the things that we've done since March is really look at more digital subscriptions and digital access. So once students have those devices, everything that they would need is on that device. So this is just pretty telling. As we know, in education, we talk a lot about the learning gap, of what the achievement gap for students. And here's an access gap that unfortunately, I think COVID-19 shed light on this access gap for many of our students. And when only 8% of our, or 6% of our white students have homes without high-speed internet, and then you look at 16% of our Black students don't have internet, that's a huge gap. And we as a society have to work on fixing that. And that's one of the problems that we continuously face. You can go to the next slide. So here's more looking, nationwide kind of data, similar data that looks at the number of school-age children that live in households without internet. So you can kind of compare this to what we just saw for Guilford County Schools. I think this is really important when you look at the income level as well. What I hear a lot of people say is that, well, it's really income, it's not about race. Well, that's not true. And that's fake. And so this really shows you that it is still about race, because even, our high income Black students still have a higher percentage than white students. And it's almost double, or it's more than double. So I think that's really important to put in context, because it is about race and ethnicity. It's not just about income. And that's really important as we move forward to look at that. So what's next? So again, I've talked a lot about we're moving into one-to-one school district. We hope to have devices in the hands of all of our students kind of in January, February-ish. They're starting to come in now, but if you can think about it, trying to get 70,000 devices into the hands of kids, many of which are still remote and virtual, and during a pandemic when we can't congregate and can't have a lot of people in one space, is very difficult. So that's something that's really a priority for us, is getting those devices out to students. And RFP stands for Request for Proposals. So one of the things that we're really trying to partner with is our local universities and colleges, universities, GTCC, to provide internet options and solutions to every single child. So we believe that internet is the next thing that we need to talk about as a society, and it's not okay that poor children do not have access, and that every single person in our community should have access to the internet. And so trying to work through solutions for that. I talked a little bit earlier about how we have purchased some Wi-Fi access points, or they're called MiFi for students, and students can contact their school and their principal to check one of those out. And then that way they can have that internet access. Students started to come back to school today, so today is really busy in Guilford County. Our pre-K through second graders came back today. I've been at schools all morning, and it was great to see students back in the building, sitting in classrooms. And so we brought them back. We have some EC students who are returning next Monday, and then 3rd through 12th grade will return in January. And again, it's been a great day so far, so we're really excited about that. There was a $300 million school bond that was passed in the election. I feel like that was like just last week, but yeah, it was last week. Okay. But to give you context, like where my wife lives, where my wife's from is from right outside of Boston, and they're building a school there that's $380 million for one high school. So when you think, oh, the school's getting $300 million, that's great. In context, it's not. You know, we really need $2 billion to bring every school that we have up to code and up to modernization. 300 million is, again, great, and we're not going to say no to that, but it is just a small drop in the bucket to what we really need to make sure that our kids are learning appropriately. We still have state accountability testing, which I always, anytime I'm in front of people, I want them to know that. That's not a Guilford County Schools decision. That's a federal government decision, that at the end of the school year, we will still test kids like we have every other school year. And so when you think about all the context of what we've talked about today, that we still have kids who haven't logged on, we still have kids who don't have a computer, we still have kids who don't have internet, but yet they're still expected to take this state accountability test at the end of the year. And it still holds schools accountable for how their students are learning. So I just think it's important to always kind of put that out there in front of people so they realize that that's still going on, because I hear from a lot of parents who are saying, why is Guilford County Schools requiring this? It's not a Guilford County Schools requirement. It's a federal government requirement, that we still have state accountability testing this year. And then of course our enrollment is down, and that's again nationwide, but always trying to find kind of why, what's going on, where are these kids? We don't want to lose these students. There's a huge learning loss data that talks about what, you know, students haven't been in school since March, and that really during that time, they've lost over a year and a half of learning, because as you know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so these students who, you know, have been getting online learning, it is not the same as face-to-face learning. And we're very clear on that, that kids really need to be back in school face-to-face to get the quality of education that they need. The last time this happened was in World War II, when kids were out of school. And if you look at the amount of income that those students did not receive over their lifetimes, it's staggering, and really puts a damper not just on themselves, but when we talk about our society as a whole. So it's really important that these students get back in school and that we can really work on, for years to come, the material and the instruction that they've lost. I'm way over my time, so I apologize. So I'll kind of turn it back over to the next person, but I'll be here and we'll answer questions in the chat as they come up. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamie King, for sharing that with us and all Guilford County is doing and you are doing to help with this time with our students and our teachers and our families. Next up, please join me in welcoming Jamila Pender. Jamila is the Assistant Director, Healthy Communities at Cone Health. She is a graduate of NC State University and has an extensive background working with uninsured and underinsured individuals and communities. Jamila also serves on United Way's Health and Basic Needs Impact Council. And just last week, Jamila was named this year's COVID Hero from the Volunteer Center of the Triad in recognition of her incredible work to help our community during the pandemic. She is very much a healthcare hero. And Jamila, take it away. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to start off with a question. So if you have a piece of paper near you, if your phone, I want you to just look at this picture that you see that's pixelated. And I want you to write down, how can you make life easier for someone else? So again, how can you make life easier for someone else? And think about that when you look at this picture that's very pixelated. Okay, next. So just wanted to, again, like Dr. King gave, just wanted to give you some context of when we're talking about the social determinants of health, and that's where we're going. That's where we're going, and when we're in healthcare right now, is looking at what are those things that contribute to a person's overall health and well-being. And one of the things which listening to Dr. King is very similar in the healthcare arena when you're talking about access and what does access look like. Many of the things that he spoke about is the very things that we are dealing with in the healthcare arena. So when we talk about access to healthcare, The fact that North Carolina, of course, is a non-Medicaid expansion state. So what does that mean? That means there's a large gap that we have with individuals that do not have access to medical health insurance as a result of their income. So that's majority of those individuals fall 200% of the FPL. So again, they're right there at or below the line of poverty. And then when you look at limited health care, so let's say somebody happens to have coverage, and that's where our underinsured individuals come in, where can they go to access that care? And so they're really, when we're looking at access, it's not, someone might have access to insurance, but then they might not have access to where can I see a healthcare provider. Then we talk about housing. So when you're looking at thinking about your basic needs, when you look at Greensboro being the third largest city in North Carolina, we have one of the highest eviction rates, not only in the state, but in the country. And you would think, as rich as we are in resources here in Guilford County and Greensboro, why do we have so many people experiencing homelessness? Then we look at the other social determinants of health, which is nutrition. And so when we talk about food equity, the fact that we have 17.8% of, we rank 17.8% in Guilford County in terms of being food insecure, and we are one of many food deserts. And so what contributes to that? What does that look like? And then looking at employment and economics. If you don't have the training that you need, then you can't get the job that you need to be able to make sure that you have health insurance, make sure that you have the food that you need, and make sure that you have the housing. So again, like Dr. King just said, you know, when you look at the last time we were in a situation like this, these individuals that were in World War II, look at what we're dealing with right now. If someone does not have the schooling that they need, that education and that training, they're not going to be able to go after those jobs, to be able to take care of themselves and take care of their families. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how all of this plays into COVID and the wellness of our community right now. And many people think right now, oh, because of COVID, this is a new issue, or these are new problems that's happening, where in fact, they're not new issues. These are issues that we've been dealing with if you work in this arena for years, many years, but now as a result of COVID, they've kind of bubbled up to the surface, where now it's not a matter of we can just keep talking about, oh, this is an issue, but what are the things we really need to do to address it? So how do we get to the root issue of some of these things? And so one of the biggest challenges that we have that happened during COVID is, one, back in July, we weren't doing enough testing. And so as a result of doing enough testing, we were not in certain areas and certain communities, there wasn't enough testing around COVID to be able to help individuals address what was going on in regards to COVID. So one of the things we started doing within the system is we really hammered down and said, what is it that we need to do and how do we need to show up? And so one of the things that I do is work with our mobile COVID unit. And so what we do COVID at the community level, because many times we're asking people, come to us, or how can we reach people? But what does it look like for us to be in areas where people can reach us, sort of place-based care, so to speak. And so as a result of saying, okay, where do we need to be, and asking and engaging with members of the community and saying, where do we need to be, we were able to be in certain hotspot areas and in the neighborhoods to be able to provide testing, which then led to others saying, wow, you know what, we don't really have this in our community. How can we be able to get some of this testing, because it goes beyond the testing. So you get testing and then what? So then the other problem happened is, okay, someone happens to be positive. What does it look like for that individual if they have challenges or limited funds for housing because you need to quarantine? What does it look like if I happen to be positive and I'm supposed to quarantine, but I need, I don't have the available, I don't have a job where I'm able to take off work to be able to say quarantine for 14 days. So you're left with this dilemma where people, you want to do the right thing in terms of you know, I want to quarantine, stay safe, keep my family safe. But then on the opposite end, how am I going to be able to meet the basic needs for my family? And as a result of some of that, that's where we've had an increase in positive rates in Greensboro as of some of those challenges that some of the challenges that individuals are experiencing. Next. So a lot of my work in regards to, you know, how do we have nimble COVID testing in areas that where we have low sampling rates. What does it look? The other issue is food and nutrition. And so one of the biggest things that we have seen an increase on is people needing food. And we have new individuals accessing the system in regards to needing food. And so one of the things, like they said, with the virtual learning that's happening with schools, I've been working a lot with some of the schools and with our partners with how can we get our children fed during these times. And so if you look at this map right here, I thought this was just some helpful, just interesting information to be able to share. But this is a map of Greensboro. And so this map of Greensboro pretty much shows where the grocery stores are in Greensboro. And if you look at all the, and I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but if you look at all the little red dots, some of this is northeast and southeast Greensboro, and some of this is southwest and northwest Greensboro. But when you look in southeast and northeast Greensboro, we have literally 9 grocery stores compared to 45 grocery stores on the other side of town. So when you're talking about being able to have access to food and then looking at it, access to nutritious food, there's a gap, there's a huge problem. And so when you have that in terms of how am I going to get food, and transportation is a barrier, because when COVID happened, think about it, everything shut down. From going to the doctor's office, everything reverted to virtual visits. So that's the challenges that we had, just like the last presenter presented. If you don't have the technology or the devices or the internet to be able to see the doctor, there goes your access to be able to seek care. When you're looking at the bus systems, when everything happened with COVID, the buses stopped for a little bit, and then they have reduced rates. So then there we go with the transportation issue. Then when you talk about being able to access that food, so the way you used to be able to access that food, you no longer have that means to be able to do it. That causes a challenge. Or when you're able to provide meals for your children, and meals were provided through the schools, that led another barrier to be able to address food. And so here, I just thought this was very interesting. And if you see some of the pictures, this happens to be one of the areas where we happen to do food distribution right now for children, seniors, and adults that are experiencing food insecurity right now. This is an area that had a grocery store, but it falls within the area that has 9 grocery stores. And when you think about that, think about your life and think about where's the closest grocery store to where you live. How is it easy? How accessible is it for you to be able to get to that grocery store? Do you take the bus? You know, are you taking an Uber? Are you taking, you know, do you have a car? And in many of these situations where we are doing right now, while I'm working on food distributions, a lot of people don't have access to be able to really take the bus because, again, it costs money. A lot of people can't get an Uber because, again, it costs money. And so really looking at how can we be more strategic to be able to set up areas where people can get food, but that's just the now in what we're doing, but really looking at it, what do we need to do long term, and what systems do we need to put in place? What systems do we need to tear down, and what new systems that need to be rebuilt, to be built up so that we're able to have access to food for all and not just some. Next. And so my question I leave you with is, what role do you feel you play with in regards to how COVID has affected the social determinants? So again, I talked a little bit about, you know, access to be able to see a provider. I've talked about nutrition, being able to have access to food. I've talked a little bit about transportation. Do I have the transportation to get back and forth to work? Do I have access to get back and to get to the grocery store to be able to get my basic needs? And then looking at also what does it look like in regards to employment. A lot of people lost their jobs, or a lot of people have reduced wages. So all of that ties into how people are able to live healthy and well. And just thinking about it, if we were to put a vision together, a vision statement, you know, we want to be able to create an environment of well-being and community for all people. But what does that look like, and what role do you play in that? And the thing I like about this is there's a picture down here where, you know, it doesn't take this huge act of service to meet a basic need. It can be something as simple as you see in the middle, someone coming and packaging up a prepared meal to be able to hand out. It could be something as simple as you going and you're doing traffic control, or you're going and saying, how can I broker other relationships to really look at how we can address some of the food insecurity needs, or how we can address some of the training needs or employment. There might be a job that you can think of or that you know of that's coming open. How can you let somebody else know about that? And so to me, I feel like our roles is, how can we be more connected, and what are things that we can do to be able to help people thrive and flourish and have what they need? Because again, going back to the first question I asked, how can you make life easier for someone else? And that kind of starts with you. What are things that make your life easier? And then how can you then transfer that to someone else? Next. And so I leave you with, I am because you are. And so if you think back to the first picture that I had up, it was very pixelated. And when you think of something that's very pixelated, it's distorted, you can't really understand, it's not clear. But really take an approach of, what is something I can do right now, and how can I make life easier for someone else? Helps bring clarity. And then with that clarity through conversation, you're able to really help make a thriving and flourishing community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jamila. Thank you for all of you shared and inspired, and for all you're doing to take care of our community. Next up, we have our final speaker today, and we're honored to hear from Justin Williams Blackwell. Justin serves as the Community Impact Manager for Health and Basic Needs at United Way of Greater Greensboro. He is a graduate of Guilford College and holds a master's in public affairs from UNCG. Justin is an active volunteer in the Greensboro community, serving on the UNCG MPA Alumni Advisory Council, Piedmont Triad Regional Food Council, United Way Young Leaders Cabinet, and more. And another award winner in our midst, Justin was recently named in the inaugural class of the 20 in their 20s award winners from the Triad Business Journal in recognition of his many accomplishments. Thank you for being here with us, Justin. You can take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Samantha, for that introduction. Your check is in the mail for making me sound better than I am. For starters, let me say, I wish I'd gone first. I don't know how I am to follow Dr. Jamie as well as Jamila, but I'll do my best. And for those of you who aren't eating your lunch right now, I'll be swift because I know I'm probably standing between you and your lunch. And so, today, the three of us have tried to tackle these huge topics that we could honestly spend full days discussing one at a time. And so we're trying to tackle this mountain. But I would encourage you all that all the great information that you've heard from Jamie and Jamila, continue to dive deeper into it, because you'd be alarmed, but you'd also feel really optimistic about the opportunities for improvement in front of Greensboro. And so I'll try not to be redundant of all the things you've heard thus far about COVID-19, but on this first slide, I want to kind of walk you through what we noticed, not only in Greensboro, in North Carolina, and across the nation after COVID-19 impacted our communities. So if you were to start right there in the middle at the top and you think about the onset of the pandemic, it really hit home nationwide, where the entire country said, let's stop and reevaluate what we were doing, probably around the second week of March, right? So you recall, the first thing that probably happened is that you started hearing folks have to work from home. You started hearing about the members in the community being laid off. You started hearing about furloughs. You started hearing about pay decreases. So the first thing we saw was this instability happen around employment and wages. And that ran rampant. There was some data that came out saying that there were over 18 million Americans across the country that found themselves unemployed as a result of COVID-19 impacting our communities and our economy. But interestingly enough, in the housing sector, we didn't notice it immediately when it came to rent prices. In that first month and a half to 2 months, after the onset of the pandemic. If you look at national data, you'll see that the rent prices were actually stable for that first month and a half, which was the strangest thing. But if we dive deeper, what we see is that many landlords stabilized their rents because there was so much of an unknown. They didn't know how long the COVID-19 restrictions would last. Residents, individuals, instead of moving around, shopping for better prices, potentially taking a leap into home ownership, wanted to pause for a second and say, okay, maybe I should re-sign this lease to stay where I'm at. And so what we saw was people stayed in place. Now that is not a good thing. Even that in itself, in Greensboro alone, Jamila showed that we have the seventh worst eviction rate in the country. But in Greensboro alone, we have an affordability issue. So prior to COVID-19, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Greensboro was just at $875 a month. So if you think about that, that is much higher than some mortgages here in Greensboro for something of larger size. So $875 a month. Now, if you were to look at some self-sufficiency data, you would see that in order to make a rent payment and be able to afford all the other things you need to do in life, if you were a family of 2 adults, 2 children, you actually need to make nearly $63,000 a year in order to afford the average rent prior to COVID-19. But if you look at the data that talks about the area median income for Greensboro, what we find is that nearly 50% of Greensboro residents make less than $50,000 a year. And so to one of the questions that we saw in our chat box earlier, when you talk about why is there such a huge homeless population and eviction rate here in Greensboro, it's multifaceted. But one of the things that we know is contributing to it is the fact that our wages in Greensboro and in Guilford County as a whole have been stagnant for a number of years now. And in rent, affordability has been a problem for a number of years now. So if you're wondering, where did I pull that data from? I'd be happy to share it with you. United Way of North Carolina has a self-sufficiency standard that you're able to use to calculate how much you need to make as a family, all the way down to how many kids you have in order to be self-sufficient and not need any public supports or supports from your family members. So let's get back to COVID-19. Those rents were stabilized again, just for the first month and a half, maybe 2 months in some cases. But then what we started to notice was that after 2 months, after all the corporations had made their decisions on how they would cut costs, after all of the industries had made their decisions on how they were going to respond to COVID-19, we started to see rent and mortgage non-payment because there's no income there to support it. Well, what happens when rent and mortgage are not being paid? You start to see rent increase. So rents across the country, as well as in Guilford County, started to increase. And now here in Greensboro, what we noticed is that where our average rent was around $875 a month prior to COVID-19 for a 2-bedroom apartment, now we're talking about $1,100 a month for that same apartment. Okay, so let that sink in for a minute. Majority of our residents could not afford it prior to COVID-19, and it's nearly $300 more expensive once COVID-19 occurred. So naturally, that's when you see evictions and foreclosures start to rise. But fortunately, as we're going to discuss in the next slide, evictions and foreclosures, there were some moratoriums put in place to prevent us from having those folks be displaced so abruptly. So we have an affordability issue. On this next slide, what you see is a timeline. And so what I want to depict here, if we go to the end game, is that January 1st is going to be doomsday for our housing sector. But let's start here on the first bullet. The first thing that we see is that our mortgage moratoriums, which means that you can't do any foreclosures prior to this date for private mortgage insurance, ended on June the 1st. The next support that ended was statewide utility cutoff moratorium expired on July 30th. Then the unemployment benefits that we all were talking about on your social media accounts, with your friends and family, in your work, with the CARES Act that was providing $600 per week, that actually ended on July 1st. FHA mortgages, which is actually the most common mortgage in the marketplace. It's an affordable mortgage package that requires you to only have to put down potentially 3.5% in a down payment. So it's a very common mortgage package, the Federal Housing Authority. That mortgage moratorium will expire on December 31st. The eviction moratorium for non-payment will expire on December 31st. Student loan support. So we understand that this event is being put on by the Young Leaders Leadership Cabinet. And I imagine that even if you don't fall into that demographic of a young leader, you're young at heart, but you probably, if you're in this country, have some form of a student loan. Those federal loan suspensions will expire on December 31st. If you're fortunate enough to have a substantial amount of money in your 401k retirement account that you could access in terms of an emergency, the CARES Act provided you a period of time to say you can withdraw money from your 401k without penalty, all right? Because you know there's a penalty for pulling it out early. You can pull it out without penalty if you need it to stabilize your household for COVID-19. That is in place, but it's only a 3-year payback. So if you found yourself unemployed for 6-8 months and you've had to take out nearly $60,000 to stabilize your own household and maybe the household of your friends and family, you have 3 years to pay that back. Okay, and then then a penalty comes in. Well, what if I told you I have to put you're already paying your car payment, potentially you're already paying a mortgage. Now you need to pay back yourself a loan that is an $80,000 loan. All of a sudden, I gave you an $80,000 car and you have to make payments on it. It's going to be pretty ridiculous. And so if you can see here, when January 1st comes, all of these supports that have been able to keep certain populations stabilized will end. So go back to evictions for a second. Here in Greensboro and across the country, it's very difficult to get an active count on how many people are facing evictions right now. But at the beginning of October, here in Greensboro, we had about 601 pending eviction cases. Those were evictions that had been filed already. And so when the eviction moratorium went into place, they were frozen. So that is not a complete number of individuals who are going to be facing evictions come January 1st. So we know that that number is much higher, but that's 600 individuals already that you could imagine could be facing evictions in the first quarter of next calendar year. Where are they going to go? We're going to have a huge amount of people who are displaced. We already have a rent affordability issue. Where are they going to go? Where are the individuals who are facing mortgage foreclosures? Where are they going to go? We already have a lack of affordable housing stock. Where are they going to go? And so this is why I say that January 1st is a doomsday for the housing sector. Okay? So you can go to the next slide. But there have been some local responses. So with United Way of Greater Greensboro, they partnered with the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, as well as the City of Greensboro, to form what's called the Greensboro Virus Relief Fund. That fund was launched on March the 30th. And since that time, as you can see, this chart shows you October the 20th data. But since that time, we distributed nearly $300 million in the community to 501c3 nonprofit organizations that can work on stabilizing our community across all these different sectors. And as you can see, to no surprise, the largest chunk of our funding went to housing vulnerabilities. And since this chart was created, we've distributed nearly another $250,000 with the sole focus on housing vulnerabilities. And so that percentage has grown since this time. The partners that we distributed that money to reported that nearly 25,000 rent payments and utility payments were conducted with that money. And so much of that money was to stabilize people. The other thing that has happened here in Greensboro is that Guilford County government received some of the CARES Act money, nearly $3 million they have distributed as well into the community to stabilize our community after COVID-19. And the largest portion of their money has gone to housing and food as well. And the other thing that I want to lift up is, as a statewide initiative, there's a program that some of you may be aware of. I see some housing folks on the call today, the North Carolina HOPE program. So this program stands for housing opportunities and prevention of evictions. This program was launched as the state of North Carolina received funding from our federal government to avoid evictions and foreclosures. Okay, so that money, unfortunately, as some of you are aware, the applications to get into that program actually closed yesterday at 6 p.m. because there was such an overwhelming demand and need for it. What a resident could do is they could call 211, the hotline that is statewide that you can call for any need that you have, supported by all of your local United Ways, including this one. They could call if they had a landlord who was willing to work with the program, if they could show proof of how much it would cost, what their own income information was. They could apply and through this program get their rent payments caught up, get them stabilized to prevent evictions. The demand was so overwhelming that they had to close the applications yesterday. When the program initially launched less than a month and a half ago, it was an idea that this would be able to run throughout the end of the calendar year, but the demand was so great that they had to close applications yesterday in order to make sure that they didn't make promises or payments that they could not keep. And so if you get nothing else from what you've seen today, is you understand that the housing problems here in Greensboro have been bad, but COVID-19 has exacerbated those problems and we're in for a battle moving forward. So if you go to the next slide. So what are some things that you can do? I'll start at the bottom first. You can give, advocate, and volunteer with any of these housing organizations, but obviously I'd ask that you do so with United Way of Greater Greensboro. It's going to be very important that you reach out to your friends and families and you support local housing agencies, particularly housing counseling agencies and shelters, to make sure that they are getting the resources, the volunteer support that they need to do their work without all of the red tape. Expediency is going to be key here. We want low barriers to access for the help people need because this pandemic couldn't have come at a worse time. If you look at the overall world of philanthropy, this has been an election year, and as we know in philanthropy, it is much more difficult to raise money for nonprofits during an election year because people divert their support to their political interests, and rightfully so. But the pandemic couldn't have come at a worse time so that people have a lack of disposable income to donate, but also for such a prolonged period of time. The Guilford County Emergency Management Department, while they have done an excellent job, none of them nor any of us on this call could have imagined that we'd still be holding weekly task force meetings or still going through COVID-19 precautions or looking at the possibility of stepping back to a phase 2. None of us could have predicted it would last this long. So COVID-19 couldn't have happened at a worse time. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is in January, on January 27th to be exact, Guilford County will be conducting a point-in-time count. So I did notice by glancing over, someone mentioned our pit count. So the point-in-time count is how HUD requires all of their communities that they're funneling money through a continuum of care, requires us to do a pit count, which means we need to see how many individuals in our community are without a home at any one point in time. And so they determine that time is usually the third Wednesday in January every year. So this coming up year will be January 27th. But volunteers will be needed. We do not have any final arrangements yet, but I would like you all to save that date because we'll need the manpower. Individuals can't be counted haphazardly. We have to physically lay eyes on individuals and count them. Now here is the plus and the minus. The more homeless individuals we have in our community, it's a more accurate representation of what we need. Therefore, we can leverage more resources from the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department. And the minus there is that obviously the more people we have homeless, we get more resources, and we would love for that number to be low. In the past, we've seen that the pit count in Guilford County has been around 1,100 people, but the pit count is not a perfect tool. There's a lot of imperfection there that can be remedied by the more volunteers we have and the more intentionality we have. We actually know that we probably have upwards of 2,500 people in Guilford County who are homeless. And so again, it's not a perfect thing, but we know that we have to have people engaged in that process and we have to have an accurate depiction of our homeless population. And to finish up my section, I do want to shout out the Guilford County Continuum of Care. This is a network of all of your shelter providers, as well as individuals working in housing counseling. The continuum of care has done an excellent job, the best they can, at pivoting to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, some of you are aware that there's an isolation and quarantine hotel that's being utilized to keep those individuals who are without a home safe, as well as limit the spread of the virus during this time period. And they've had over 500 guests go through this hotel. And because of the proactive actions of the members of the CLC, they've had less than 30% of the individuals who've been quarantined there for any amount of time actually test positive. And so this is amazing that they've been able to keep the positive rate and the transmission rate down through those activities. And so I really want to lift them up, but ask you to support them as well. As I mentioned, January is going to be doomsday for the housing market, but January also starts the beginning of winter. And so you'll start to see your shelters raise their white flags to say, hey, it's below freezing tonight. You're without a home, come inside, be safe. Guilford County has done an excellent job in making sure that we don't have any deaths of our individuals who are homeless because it's been freezing outside. Well, if you can imagine, trying to provide shelter during COVID-19 has been challenging itself to keep people safe. Imagine when the amount of people who are without a home increases because of all those supports that are ending at the same time happens during the winter months. And so please support them, do the best you can. A resource you can always give a neighbor who is in need of support is 211. Dial that 3-digit number. It'll get them connected, whether they're in Greensboro, Jamestown, High Point, or even in Raleigh. And so I want to leave you with that as a resource. And I will pause now to open ourselves up, the three speakers, to the questions of the group.
Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you so much to all three of our speakers. We have so much information that you all have shared in this time, and we are running out of time for the rest of this presentation today. So we are going to capture the chat box and be able to get some more of those answers to questions out to you when we forward you a copy of the link from the presentation today, and the actual presentation itself, you will get a copy of that too. So if you all will join me in thanking so much our three speakers for today. Virtual clap, hand wave. Yes, thank you. So much great information and so little time for how much you all have to share. Before we go, we're going to have one last person wrap this up, and that is Marcus Thomas. He is the Vice Chair of United Way Young Leaders, and he is another award winner. We have so many award winners in our midst. He was just named the 2020 Volunteer of the Year from the Volunteer Center of the Triad. So Marcus, you can go ahead and take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you for everybody for being with us here this afternoon. The issues that you heard about today, whether it was challenges with education, health access to healthcare, housing, and just to name a few, they all need innovative solutions. And that's where the United Way comes in, but also that's where you come in. United Way's of the Greater Greensboro's efforts to end local poverty have never been more important than they are now. Prior to the COVID pandemic, there was 57,000 people living in poverty. We all can only imagine what that number has skyrocketed to now. And so United Way's single focus mission is to end poverty. And the strategies and the plans and everything they've implemented, it is working currently today. And last year alone, United Way created 30 partnerships that supported 59 holistic programs and initiatives. Thanks to that strategy, more than 30,000 people received basic needs support. Over 3,000 people took steps toward financial stability and independence. Almost 3,000 youth achieved educational success, and more than 20,000 people received support to lead a healthy lifestyle. Just like you heard today, a lot of these issues are intertwined. That's what makes poverty such a complex word, such a complex topic, because there's so many things that intertwine into this one word. And that's why the United Way strategy is holistic and focuses on addressing the entire needs of the family. We hope after today's talk, you feel inspired to act. There are a few big ways that you can support the United Way just right now. Save the date to volunteer with us on January the 27th for the point in time count. You can also be an ambassador for Giving Tuesday. It's super easy to help raise funds to support the United's work during the holiday season. Next, you can make a donation to the United Way's efforts to end poverty. You know, will you be one of the ones who give $100 this year? Will you be one that gives $1,000 this year? It's very simple, easy, and safe for you to give just on their website at unitedwaygso.org. You will also receive all the information you need for your tax time, because tax year is coming up as well. So they will also get you that information as well. Then after you make that donation, please share with your family, friends, colleagues, everyone, to help bring awareness to the great work that the United Way is doing and to also support their mission. And we hope that you share what you learned today with friends. Invite them to join you as you deepen your understanding of local issues and where you can make a difference today. And lastly, stay connected to the United Way. You know, you follow them on social media. You can also find on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And so just please stay connected and help us as we continue to work to end poverty. So just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We definitely hope that you took something away from everything that you heard today, and continue just to join the United Way in their efforts to end poverty. And thank you for attending. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday rainy afternoon. Take care.